The Sony FX5 is officially out, and while I haven't personally got my hands on it, I just wanted to share my thoughts as a longtime Sony FX3 user. For some context, I've had the Sony FX3 for about 5 years now, and it's been a dream camera for me. I consider myself a YouTube filmmaker, so I make solo short films, tutorials, gear reviews, and based on the specs of the Sony FX5, it feels like it's geared more towards traditional filmmakers who are on sets, DPs, and maybe someone who already has a Sony Burano or a Sony Venice 2 that needs similar image quality in a smaller, more compact body, which would be the Sony FX5 now. The Sony FX5 has a 16.6 megapixel stacked sensor, and you can shoot up to 5K open gate and 4K full frame, triple base ISO, and it costs $48.98 US without the XLR top handle. In the Sony FX line, it sits between the FX3 and the FX6. I'm really happy with the max resolution of the FX5 just being 5K. I feel like a lot of camera manufacturers think we want 6K, 8K, or 12K. If you're like me and you're just posting to YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok, anything more than 4K is just overkill. The FX3 is now a 5+ year old camera that has a max resolution of 4K, and a ton of filmmakers and creators, myself included, still use this camera. Now, triple base ISO on the FX5 honestly sounds crazy in a good way. You now have 3 base ISOs of 800, 4000, and 12,800. If you're unfamiliar with base ISO, that's the ISO you want to shoot at on your camera to get the most dynamic range and the best noise performance out of your camera sensor. If you are a mini documentary or wedding filmmaker, the middle base ISO of 4000 will be perfect, especially if you are shooting dimly lit situations where you might not have time to set up a light. At first glance, the body looks pretty similar to the Sony FX3, which I'm really happy they kept that compact form factor. And the FX5, I believe, only weighs a half a pound more than the FX3, which is another plus. The button layout and the dials are a little bit different, especially on the back of the camera compared to the FX3. The FX5 seems to strip back a few of the dials and be more of a dedicated video focused camera, while the FX3 still feels a little bit more familiar if you are used to traditional mirrorless or DSLR cameras. And from what I've seen, I'm not even sure the FX5 has a dedicated photo mode anymore, while the FX3 does have a dedicated photo mode that you can switch into. So that is something to take note of. The FX5 now has an updated LCD screen that is a little bit larger, and it's a vari-angle screen, so you can tilt and swivel the screen, which I think is great. I like to keep my Sony FX3 pretty bare bones, so I never use an external monitor anymore. And one of my only complaints about the FX3 is that I do feel like the LCD is just a little too small, especially when shooting in bright daylight. So I think that's a really great, worthwhile upgrade in the Sony FX5. Now, a huge difference between the FX5 and the FX3 is that the FX5 now has the CineAlta menu system, which is also in the Sony Burano and the Sony Venice 2. So if you are already familiar with those cameras, it'll probably feel pretty similar. While the Sony FX3 still has the traditional CineAlta menu system, which is again more geared towards a hybrid photo video style. Now let's talk about open gate and RAW, because in order to shoot 5K open gate on the FX5, you have to shoot in the RAW codec. One thing to note is that Sony said in a future update, you will be able to shoot open gate in a compressed file size, not just a RAW file size. If you're unfamiliar with open gate, this setting means you're utilizing the full height and width of your sensor. On the Sony FX5, this gives you a 3:2 aspect ratio, and this just makes it a little bit more flexible for cropping. RAW video basically refers to an uncompressed file type. It also gives you more flexibility to color grade and adjust your exposure in post-production. However, RAW files are significantly larger than compressed files, which you're going to need fast SD cards or CF Express Type A cards, and you'll need more memory on your external hard drives. And with the recent skyrocket of both memory cards and SSDs and hard drives, it's not going to be a very economical way to go if you do plan on shooting a ton of RAW footage. Now, the price of $48.98 US without the XLR top handle, and that's not a cheap camera by any means. But I will say, I bought my FX3 back in 2021 for $38.98 USD, and thankfully it paid itself early on through my gigs that I was getting. So the reason I'm not getting the FX5 is because the truth is I still really enjoy creating with my FX3. It hasn't brought on any issues or shortcomings where I feel like I need more camera. I'm still learning and honing in on my craft, and the Sony FX5 would just be overkill for what I use it and need it for. But another cool thing about the Sony FX5 is that if Sony continues to follow their pattern of releases, we're gonna see a trickle-down effect of features and the sensor in the Sony FX5, hopefully in cheaper and more affordable camera bodies. Anyways, those are just my thoughts. Let me know in the comments what you think, and I want to say a huge thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.